That's the way I like it. Said with conviction and I agree with it. I love it. Amen indeed. The new covenant, foretold in Jeremiah 31, is drawn that will pierce the grueling night of the shattered people of Israel. Chapter 31 of Jeremiah is known as one of the comfort chapters. Up until these passages, Jeremiah has literally been raising holy hell in Israel and Judah. He has been railing against those who continue to sin against God through their avarice, their extreme greed. Those in power and with great wealth lording it over others, creating a larger and ever widening break in society. Even to the point of trying to convince those not as wealthy that they were not blessed by God. Can you imagine people doing that? It's a kind of ancient prosperity gospel. If you're not rich, then you're not holy. Jeremiah is the prophet that upsets virtually all the apple carts of the kings, queens, priests, wealthy and powerful. Believe me, they did not want to invite him to a dinner party. He was a real Debbie Downer. But then came the Babylonians, and they spread out over the land of Israel and Judah, and they destroyed the temple, and they carted off all the officials and wealthy. Anybody who was anybody was carted off to Babylon. As the people of Israel faced the destruction of their nation and the prospect of a long and bitter exile in Babylon, this, in chapter 31, is where Jeremiah says that God presents the Israelites with assurance of restoration, lodging the seed of a glorious future hope in the cold, hard soil of Israel and Judah's winter. The UCC theologian Walter Brueggemann identifies a number of elements to the new covenant promised here. First, there will be a new solidarity. No more this widening maw between the haves and the have-nots. No longer this widening political maw between Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. Yes, they were split at the time. There will be greater unity between all peoples, the ruler and the ruler. Second, there will be a new knowledge, a new way of knowing God. God's knowledge of God's saving grace and greater adherence to God's justice in the world. The people will be following God's edicts for justice in the world and be closer to God's presence. They will have God's laws and God's love written on their hearts, which leads to the third point. The new relation will no longer be characterized by intermediation and the distance that maintained between Yahweh and the majority of the people. Middlemen, such as the priests and the wealthy who could afford to cleanse themselves every day in the holy priestly tradition, they were no longer going to be the intermediaries. I like to call this the Jewish Protestant Reformation. For it was. All of a sudden, everybody in Israel and Judah, 500 years before the time of Jesus, believed in the priesthood of all believers. Everyone had a personal connection. They had God's laws written on their hearts. All of these elements of the new covenant relation are founded upon a great act of divine initiative. It was God that was doing this. God's grace. An initiative which breaks the vicious cycle of sin and punishment. You see, up to this point, if you didn't wash in a certain way, if you didn't eat certain foods, the holiness code said that you were not holy, you were not righteous with God. And Jeremiah was saying, nope, that's going to be broken. Our God is a God of love and forgiveness. We're no longer going to be in there, oh, did I wash my hands enough? Am I doing the right thing all the time? No. It's going to be written on your heart. The popular proverb of Jeremiah's day was, the parents have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge, which means that your parents' sin, or your grandparents' sin, or your great-great-great-great-grandmother's sin prolongs your sin in the world. Can you hear how oppressive that is? It was an ancient Jewish form of karma. Okay? And Jeremiah was saying, God is not having that. Yahweh declares a release from all debts, reigniting their guttering hope. Within the past to which they were once shackled, those whose weight had threatened to drag them down into the abyss, they will now discover the liberating realization of the promised new covenant knowledge of the forgiving God. They don't have to worry about their parents' or grandparents' sin anymore, because that is not the point. That's not the point anymore. God's love and law and forgiveness is now written on their hearts. That's the point. They're not feeling this, they're feeling this not just as individuals, but also as a community. It's as if there was some great sin in a congregation, and everybody said, that is forgiven. You don't have to go back there anymore. And you can just be here with God today, knowing that you are forgiven, not just as an individual, but as a church, as a community, and as a nation. So these are the promises that God was making through their prophecies of Jeremiah to the exiled Israelites in captivity in Babylon. How does this relate to us today? What ways are you exiled? What ways are we exiled from God's love in our lives? We have so many people that are exiled in this world. You can name them quietly, but I'm going to focus on one group of people. Our children. They are being exiled from a place of safety to a place of danger. The safety they once felt in their schools is being shattered by the violence being promulgated by people with semi-automatic weapons being turned into simply automatic weapons with large ammunition clips. Vanessa Bradby, Director of Ministry for Children, Youth, and Family at Olivet Congregational Church in St. Paul, here in Minnesota, has a few things to say about what's written in her heart, and I'll quote from her. I would like to share the reasons why we'll be marching on March 24th at the Minnesota State Capitol. You see, they're having one there, and they're having one in Washington, D.C., and there's over 700 around the country, and ours is a sister march here in Rochester. I am a faith formation director at the youth group leader. After the shooting at Major E. Stoneman Douglas High School, I talked with my youth group about the situation. At one point, I asked them if they were ever worried about the same thing happening to them, and all of them immediately answered yes. I think about it all the time, said one 15-year-old girl. I'm scared. It's not just children who are scared, it's their families too. In your churches are parents of kindergartners who do 5 lockdown drills a year. 5 lockdown drills a year. Crouching silently in classrooms and learning to hide from active shooters. I am one of those parents, she says. I live with that, and I believe that the time is right to do something about it. Now, I'm old enough to remember duck and cover. Make sure we were safe from an atomic weapon. But I remember only doing that once or twice a year. I can't imagine 5 times. This, of course, is why Felicia and I will be marching for our lives here in Rochester on March 24th, next Saturday, meeting at 9:55 at the old movie theater, then the Barnes & Noble, and there in Peace Plaza. Does everybody pretty much know where that is? The march begins at 10 a.m. and we're going to be there meeting people at 9:55. It's a one-mile march from Peace Plaza and ends at the Mayo Park behind the Civic Center. Here is the March for Our Lives official statement. Not one more. We cannot allow one more child to be shot at school. We cannot allow one more teacher to make a choice to jump in front of a firing assault rifle to save the lives of our students. We cannot allow one more family to wait for a call or text that never comes. Our schools are unsafe. Our children and teachers are dying. We must make it our top priority to save these lives. March for Our Lives is created by, inspired by, and led by students across the country who will no longer risk their lives waiting for someone else to take action to stop this epidemic of mass school shootings that has become all too familiar. In the tragic wake of the 17 lives brutally cut short in Florida, politicians are telling us that now is not the time to talk about this. March for Our Lives says, no, now is exactly the time to talk about this. Now, why am I doing this personally? Because this is written on my heart. This is what I believe God is writing on my heart. I imagine myself, God forbid anything like this would happen in this town. But if it did, and I did not do this, I know that I would hang my head in shame forever. I know I must do this. Parker Palmer has written beautifully of the true covenant written on our hearts with God. It means the acceptance of weighty obligations to a Lord who demands that we do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. I believe that's how God wants us to think about our lives in this world, thinking about how we can serve our fellow man, woman, child, creation, doing justice, loving kindness, walking humbly, marching humbly with our God, having God's laws written on our hearts, just that close, that natural, that easy, as near to us as our next thought, and as necessary to us as our next breath. God wants to be written within us. The heart just may be where God's intelligence or logic is expressed within us. The laws of God have been studied, interpreted, and practiced for generations after generations. The laws of God reveals God's loving will for humankind and God's eternal covenant with all creation, and it is holy, precious, and beautiful. And in the life of Jesus, we discover the lengths to which God will go to write his law, his love on our hearts. A redeeming love that shows us how bold and selfless God's love can be. A crucified love that reveals the depth of pain God will endure to reach and to save each and every one of us. A resurrected love that cannot be swallowed up by any temporary setback or disappointment, not even death itself. An eternal love that knows no earthly or heavenly end. We are not alone. We are never alone. For we have a God who comes to us in human form, who intervenes in the course of human history, who reveals to us a presence that refuses to let us go. That is what God is writing on your hearts this very day. Knowing the heart of Jesus and loving God are the same thing. The mystery of ministry. Make no mistake, every single one of us are ministers in this room. This is the priesthood of the believer. We are all ministers. The mystery of ministry is that we have been chosen to make our own limited and very conditional love the gateway for the unlimited and unconditional love of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.